The sun had barely risen over Ouagadougou when Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of his residence in the Koulouba district. The early morning air carried the familiar scent of millet porridge cooking in nearby compounds and the distant sound of roosters announcing the new day. At 36 years old, Traoré had grown accustomed to mornings that began before most of the city awakened. His military training had instilled in him a discipline that even the highest office in the land could not shake. His security detail waited by the vehicles, their faces stern and alert. Lieutenant Ouedraogo, the head of his personal security, approached with a tablet in hand. The man's weathered face bore the marks of years spent fighting in the northern insurgency, where he and Traoré had served together before the events of September 2022 changed everything. "Good morning, Captain," Ouedraogo said, using the military title that Traoré still preferred despite his current position as president. "We have the schedule for today. The first meeting is at the Ministry of Defense at 0800 hours. Traoré nodded, glancing at the schedule. His day was packed with meetings about security operations in the Sahel region, discussions with economic advisors about the recently nationalized gold mines, and a review of agricultural programs that were beginning to show promise across the country. Since taking leadership, he had pushed for a more hands-on approach to governance, often visiting sites and facilities personally rather than relying solely on reports. "Add the construction site of the new school in Sisson to the schedule," Traoré said, referring to one of Ouagadougou's neighborhoods. "I want to see the progress myself." Ouedraogo made a note on his tablet. "Yes, Captain. But that will put us behind schedule for the afternoon meetings." "Then we move faster," Traoré replied with a slight smile. "Our people need to see that we are working, not just talking." As they prepared to depart, Traoré's phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his old comrades from the northern campaigns, Captain Zongo, who now served in the intelligence division. The message was brief. "Need to discuss something urgent. Not over phone. Can you meet at the old logistics building near Gunghin? 1100 hours." Traoré frowned. Zongo was not one to be dramatic without cause. They had fought side by side in Djibo and during the Otapuanu offensive, where they had witnessed firsthand the lack of equipment and support that had driven both of them to eventually support the changes that brought them to power. If Zongo said it was urgent, it was urgent. "Change of plans," Traoré said to Ouedraogo. "Add a stop at the logistics building in Gunghin at 11. "Captain Zongo needs to brief me on something." Ouedraogo's expression tightened. "Captain, that building is scheduled for demolition next month. It has been empty for weeks. Is it wise to meet there?" "Zongo knows what he is doing," Traoré said. "If he chose that location, he has his reasons. Probably wants privacy from prying ears." The convoy pulled out into the streets of Ouagadougou as the city began to stir to life. Merchants were setting up their stalls along Avenue Kwame Nkrumah, and the sound of balafon music drifted from a nearby compound where someone was practicing for an upcoming celebration. Despite the challenges Burkina Faso faced, the ongoing insurgency in the north, economic pressures, and international criticism, there was an unmistakable energy in the capital. People believed that change was possible, and that belief gave Traoré strength. As they drove through the city, Traoré gazed out the window at the faces of ordinary Burkinabé going about their daily lives. These were the people he had sworn to serve and protect. Every decision he made, every risk he took was for them. But he also knew that with great change came great danger, and there were those both within and outside the country who would prefer to see him fail. Chapter 2. The Weight of Leadership. The Ministry of Defense meeting ran longer than expected. General Kabore, a veteran officer who had served through multiple administrations, presented a detailed report on recent skirmishes in the tri-border area where Burkina Faso met Mali and Niger. The jihadist groups that had plagued the region for years remained a persistent threat despite increased cooperation between the three nations through the alliance of Sahel states. "The situation in Dargo remains critical," General Kabore explained, pointing to a map on the wall. "We lost 17 men in the last attack. The fighters are becoming more organized, better equipped. We believe they are receiving support from external sources." Traoré leaned forward in his chair. "What do we need to turn the tide?" "More men, more equipment, better intelligence," the general replied. "We have made progress since you took office. The new partnerships with Russia and Turkey have provided us with better weapons and training, but we are still stretched thin across too many fronts." Traoré nodded slowly. He remembered all too well what it felt like to be a soldier in the north, watching his comrades die because they lacked basic equipment while politicians in the capital lived comfortably. That frustration had been one of the driving forces behind the changes of 2022. Now, sitting on the other side of the table, he understood the complexity of balancing limited resources against unlimited needs. "We will find a way," Traoré said firmly. "Our people have suffered enough. We will not abandon them." After the meeting, as Traoré walked through the corridors of the ministry, he was stopped by Colonel Sawadogo, an older officer who had been teaching at the military academy when Traoré was a young cadet. The colonel's face carried a concerned expression. "Captain Traoré," Sawadogo said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "May I speak with you privately?" They stepped into an empty office. Sawadogo closed the door carefully before turning to face Traoré. "I have heard things," he said. "Rumors. There are people who are unhappy with the direction of the country, people within the military." Traoré was not surprised. He had survived one attempted coup already, and he knew that power attracted both loyalty and treachery. "Do you have names?" "Specific threats." "Nothing concrete," Sawadogo admitted. "Just whispers. But I fought for this country for 30 years, and I know the sound of trouble brewing. Please be careful. Trust no one completely." "I appreciate your concern, Colonel," Traoré said, placing a hand on the older man's shoulder. "But I cannot lead in fear. If I stop trusting my people, then I have already lost." "Trust? Yes," Sawadogo said. "But verify. Always verify." As Traoré left the ministry and returned to his convoy, Ouedraogo approached with an update. "Captain, we have 45 minutes before the meeting with Captain Zongo. Should we proceed directly to the logistics building?" Traoré checked his watch. "Yes, but first, let us stop at that bakery on Route de Wahiguya. I want to bring some bread to the meeting." Zongo always had a weakness for fresh bread. The convoy made the brief detour, and Traoré emerged from the bakery carrying a warm loaf wrapped in paper. The simple act of buying bread reminded him of simpler times before he carried the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. As they drove toward Gunghin, he thought about Zongo and the battles they had fought together. Whatever information his old friend had, it was important enough to warrant secrecy. The neighborhoods gradually changed as they moved toward the industrial area where the logistics building stood. The streets became less crowded, and the buildings showed more signs of age and disrepair. The logistics building itself had once been a hub of military activity, but budget cuts and reorganization had left it abandoned for the better part of a year. Chapter 3. An Unexpected Warning. The convoy pulled up to the logistics building at exactly 11 o'clock. The structure was a 3-story concrete block with faded white paint peeling from years of exposure to the harsh Sahelian sun. Most of the windows were dark, and the surrounding fence showed gaps where metal had been scavenged. A few scraggly trees provided minimal shade in the dusty compound. Traoré stepped out of the vehicle, the warm loaf of bread still in his hand. Ouedraogo immediately moved to his side, scanning the area with practiced vigilance. 4 other security personnel fanned out, establishing a perimeter. "The building appears empty," Ouedraogo reported. "But Captain Zongo's vehicle is not here yet. Perhaps we should wait in the convoy." "He will be here," Traoré said. "Zongo is never late." As they approached the main entrance, a figure emerged from the side of the building. It was an elderly man wearing worn blue work clothes, carrying a bucket and mop. His face was deeply lined, and his grey hair showed beneath a faded cap. He walked with a slight limp, and his hands bore the calluses of decades of manual labor. The old man stopped when he saw the group approaching, his eyes widening slightly when he recognized Traoré. He set down his bucket and straightened his posture as much as his aged body would allow. "President Traoré," the man said, his voice rough but respectful. He spoke in Mossi before switching to French, the country's official language. "I did not expect to see you here." Traoré approached the old man with a warm smile. "I have a meeting here. And who are you, father?" "My name is Bonkungusa," the old man replied. "I am the cleaner. They keep me on to watch the building until it is torn down. It is not much work, but at my age, any work is good work." "It is good, honest work," Traoré said. "We need more people like you." Bonkungu shifted his weight, appearing uncomfortable. "Sir, with respect, you should not go into this building today." Ouedraogo immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. "Why not?" What do you know? The old cleaner looked genuinely worried. This morning, I saw 2 men go inside. They were not soldiers. They did not look like officials. They carried bags, heavy bags. When they saw me, they told me to leave and not come back until this afternoon. They said if I told anyone, they would find my family. Traoré exchanged glances with Ouedraogo. What did these men look like? Bonkungu described them. One tall and thin, the other shorter and stocky, both wearing civilian clothes but moving with military bearing. They had arrived in a dark SUV with no official markings. The description was vague enough to fit many people, but specific enough to be concerning. "Sir, please," Bonkungu pleaded. "I am an old man, and I have seen much in my life. I know danger when I see it. There is danger in that building today. My ancestors are warning me, and I must warn you." Traoré considered the old man's words carefully. In Burkinabe culture, the warnings of elders and the guidance of ancestors were not dismissed lightly. At the same time, he had survived as a soldier and as a leader by trusting his instincts and his training. "Ouedraogo," Traoré said quietly. "Contact Zongo, see if he is close." Ouedraogo pulled out his phone and made the call. After several rings, it went to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. A third attempt produced no answer. "This does not feel right," Ouedraogo said. "Captain, we should leave. We can reconvene at a secure location." Traoré looked back at the building, then at the worried face of old Bonkungu. The cleaner had nothing to gain by lying. If anything, he was risking retaliation by speaking up. But Zongo had said the matter was urgent, and Traoré had learned that sometimes the most important information came from the most unexpected sources. "Father Bonkungu," Traoré said, "how long ago did these men enter the building?" "Perhaps 30 minutes, Magsa. Maybe 40. And they are still inside." "I believe so. I have been out here since they chased me away. I have not seen them leave." Chapter 4. The Decision. Traoré stood in the dusty compound, the weight of decision pressing upon him. The Harmattan wind picked up slightly, carrying red dust that made the air shimmer with an almost supernatural quality. Around him, his security detail waited, their eyes scanning the building and the surrounding area for any sign of threat. Lieutenant Ouedraogo moved closer, speaking in a low voice meant only for Traoré. "Captain, every instinct I have says we should leave. This situation has all the hallmarks of an ambush. If Captain Zongo is not answering his phone, he may already be compromised." Traoré nodded slowly, but his mind was working through the possibilities. Zongo was not just a comrade but a friend, someone who had proven his loyalty through years of shared danger. If he was in trouble, abandoning him was not an option. But Ouedraogo was right to be cautious. The presidency had made Traoré a target, and there were those who would use any opportunity to eliminate him. "What if Zongo is inside, waiting for me?" Traoré said. "What if he is in danger? Then we call for backup," Ouedraogo replied firmly. "We can have a full tactical team here in 15 minutes. We can surround the building, secure every exit, and go in properly prepared. That is the smart play." Old Bonkungu, who had been standing nearby listening to the exchange, spoke up again. "Sir, I may be just a cleaner, but I have lived 68 years. I raised 7 children through droughts and coups and wars. I know when something is wrong. Please, listen to an old man who has nothing to gain by lying to you." Traoré met the cleaner's eyes and saw genuine concern there. He also saw something else, a kind of resigned wisdom that came from decades of witnessing the cycles of power and violence that had marked Burkina Faso's history. Men like Bonkungu had survived by being observant, by trusting their instincts about danger. "Tell me more about these men," Traoré said to Bonkungu. "Did they say anything? Any names? Any indication of what they were doing?" The old man thought for a moment. The short one, he made a phone call while they were unloading the bags. "I could not hear everything, but I heard him say something about, 'Everything is in place back and he will come.' When he saw me watching, that is when they told me to leave." "He will come," Traoré repeated softly. The implication was clear. They were expecting someone. And given that Zongo had arranged the meeting, it was reasonable to assume they were expecting Traoré himself. One of the younger security officers, Corporal Ouattara, jogged over from the perimeter. "Sir, I found tire tracks around the back of the building. Fresh from this morning. But there is no vehicle back there now." "So they came, unloaded, and the vehicle left," Ouedraogo said. "That suggests the men are still inside, which matches what Father Bonkungu saw." Traoré made his decision. "We proceed, but carefully." Ouedraogo, take 2 men and circle the building. Check all the exits. Corporal Ouattara, you are with me. We will approach the main entrance and assess. Captain Ouedraogo began to protest. That is an order, Lieutenant, Traoré said, his voice carrying the authority of both his military rank and his office. I will not abandon a comrade without at least investigating. But we will be smart about it. Bonkungu stepped forward, his weathered hand reaching out to touch Traoré's arm. Sir, I have nothing of value to offer you except this warning. If you must go in, at least let me show you something first. The old cleaner led them to a side entrance that Traoré had not noticed before, a smaller door partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. This leads to the service stairs, Bonkungu explained. I use it when I clean. It is quieter than the main entrance. If those men are waiting in the lobby, you might be able to see them before they see you. Traoré studied the alternative entrance. It was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast, but it had the advantage of surprise. You have worked here long. 23 years, Bonkungu said with quiet pride. I know every corner of this building. Every room, every hallway, every hiding place. When I was younger, I even slept here sometimes when my wife was angry with me. He allowed himself a small smile at the memory. Father Bonkungu, Traoré said seriously, if there is danger inside, you should leave this place. Go home to your family. The old man shook his head. My family is grown, sir. My wife passed 3 years ago. My children have their own lives. But Burkina Faso is still my home, and you are trying to make it better. If an old cleaner can help protect the president, then perhaps my life still has purpose. Chapter 5. Inside the building. Traoré made the final decision to use the service entrance. Ouedraogo distributed the team, sending 2 men to cover the rear exits while he positioned himself with a view of the main entrance. Corporal Ouattara would accompany Traoré through the service door, and surprisingly, old Bonkungu insisted on guiding them, claiming he could move through the building silently despite his age. You have done enough, Traoré told the cleaner. This is now a military matter. But Bonkungu was stubborn. With respect, sir, you are a military man, but I am a building man. I know where the floors creak, where the doors stick, where the shadows are deepest. Let me help. There was something in the old man's eyes, not just concern, but a kind of determination that Traoré recognized. It was the same look he had seen in the eyes of farmers who joined the volunteer defense forces in the north, ordinary people who refused to stand by while their country was threatened. How could he refuse such courage? The service door opened with a soft creak that made them all freeze. Bonkungu held up a hand apologetically and produced a small can of oil from his pocket, applying it to the hinges with the practiced ease of someone who had maintained this building for decades. The next time he pulled the door, it opened silently. They entered into a narrow corridor that smelled of dust and disuse. The walls were bare concrete, painted an institutional green that had faded to a sickly yellow-gray. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, casting strange shadows. Bonkungu moved ahead with surprising quietness for a man of his years, his limp less pronounced now that he was focused on a task. The service stairs wound upward in a tight spiral. At each landing, Bonkungu would pause, listen, and then signal them forward or indicate they should wait. It was clear he had not exaggerated his knowledge of the building. He knew exactly which stairs creaked and which could be traversed silently. At the second-floor landing, Bonkungu held up his hand again. He pointed toward a door that opened onto the main hallway, then cupped his ear and pointed through the door. Traoré moved closer, pressing his ear against the cold metal. At first, he heard nothing but the sound of his own breathing. Then, faintly, he heard voices. 2 men, speaking in hushed tones. The words were indistinct, but the cadence was familiar. It was the clipped, efficient speech of military men. Traoré could not make out what they were saying, but he caught fragments. Any minute now, and stick to the plan. Corporal Ouattara had drawn his sidearm, holding it in a low, ready position. He looked at Traoré questioningly, awaiting orders, but Traoré held up a hand. Wait. He needed more information before committing to action. Bonkungu gestured to a small ventilation grate near the floor. He knelt down with some difficulty and peered through it, then motioned for Traoré to do the same. Through the narrow slits of the grate, Traoré could see into what had once been a briefing room. 2 men stood inside, and Bonkungu's description had been accurate. One tall and thin, the other shorter and stocky. They were not in uniform, but their bearing and the way they carried themselves marked them as military or paramilitary. But it was what else Traoré saw that made his blood run cold. In the corner of the room sat several bags, the heavy bags Bonkungu had mentioned. Next to them was what appeared to be detonator equipment, wires running from a central device to multiple points around the room. The bags were positioned against the main support columns of the building. This was not just an ambush. This was a planned demolition, meant to bring down a section of the building with anyone inside it. If Traoré had walked through the main entrance as expected, if he had gone to the third floor where his meeting with Zongo was supposedly scheduled, he would have been directly above this room when the charges detonated. Traoré pulled back from the grate and exchanged looks with Corporal Ouattara. The young corporal's eyes were wide with understanding. They had walked into a trap, but thanks to Bonkungu's warning and alternative route, they had gained precious information. Bonkungu, reading the situation with the wisdom of his years, whispered so quietly that Traoré barely heard him. "We must leave." Now, quietly. But even as the old man spoke, they heard a sound that changed everything. Footsteps on the main stairwell, coming up from the ground floor. And voices, one of them immediately recognizable to Traoré. It was Captain Zongo, but his voice carried an edge that Traoré had never heard before, a mixture of stress and something else, resignation, perhaps, or fear. "I told you he would come," Zongo was saying. "Traoré is predictable. He never abandons his men. When I sent that message, I knew he would not refuse to meet." Another voice, cold and unfamiliar, responded, "Then why is he not here yet? It is past 11. The charges are set. We cannot wait much longer." Chapter 6. The Betrayal. The realization hit Traoré like a physical blow. Zongo, his comrade, his friend, someone he had fought beside in the northern campaigns, had betrayed him. The message about an urgent meeting had been bait, and he had nearly taken it. The only thing that stood between him and death was the intuition of an old cleaner who had noticed something wrong and had the courage to speak up. Corporal Ouattara's finger tightened on his trigger, ready to burst through the door and engage, but Traoré shook his head firmly. They were outnumbered, possibly outgunned, and in a building rigged with explosives. Rushing in would accomplish nothing except getting them all killed. They needed to retreat, regroup, and neutralize the threat with proper support. Bonkungu seemed to sense Traoré's thoughts. The old cleaner pointed back down the service stairs, indicating they should withdraw. But as they began to move, Traoré's foot caught against a loose piece of metal on the floor, probably a discarded piece of construction material left over from when the building had been decommissioned. It made a sound, not loud, but in the silence of the abandoned building, it might as well have been a gunshot. The voices in the hallway stopped abruptly. "What was that?" someone said sharply. Footsteps moved quickly toward the service entrance. They had been discovered. "Go!" Traoré hissed to Bonkungu and Ouattara. "Back down, quickly!" They scrambled down the stairs, no longer concerned with silence but with speed. Behind them, the door to the service entrance burst open and shouts echoed in the stairwell. "They are here!" In the service stairs, the narrow confines of the stairwell became both a blessing and a curse. It prevented their pursuers from getting a clear shot, but it also limited Traoré's ability to maneuver or return fire. They reached the first-floor landing, and Bonkungu, with surprising presence of mind, grabbed a metal bucket full of cleaning solution and hurled it back up the stairs. It struck someone, causing a curse and a momentary delay. "This way," Bonkungu called, pushing through a door that led into a maintenance area. They ran through a maze of pipes and equipment, the old cleaner somehow knowing exactly where to go despite the dim lighting and confusing layout. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They emerged into a loading dock area at the rear of the building. Ouedraogo's voice came through Corporal Ouattara's radio. "Shots fired. Captain, report your status." "Egress through rear loading dock," Traoré responded as they ran. "Building is rigged with explosives. Do not enter. I repeat, do not enter." They burst out into the sunlight, nearly colliding with two of the security personnel who had been covering the rear exits. "Hostiles in pursuit," Ouattara shouted. "Form a perimeter." The security team immediately took defensive positions. Seconds later, two men emerged from the loading dock, the same two men Bonkungu had seen earlier. They froze when they saw the armed security personnel, their hands moving toward weapons, but Ouedraogo's voice cut through the tension. "Drop your weapons! On the ground now!" For a moment, time seemed suspended. The two men looked at each other, calculating their odds. Then the taller one slowly raised his hands while his companion began to lower himself to the ground, but instead of complying fully, the shorter man suddenly lunged to the side, drawing a pistol. The security personnel reacted instantly. 3 shots rang out in quick succession, and the man fell. His companion, seeing this, dropped his weapon immediately and prostrated himself on the ground, shouting, "Do not shoot! Do not shoot!" Traoré's ears were ringing from the gunfire, but his training kept him focused. "Secure him," he ordered, "and get everyone away from the building. It is wired to explode." As the security team moved to restrain the surviving attacker, Traoré looked back at the building. Somewhere inside, Zongo was still there, along with whoever else was part of this conspiracy, and those explosives were still armed, ready to destroy evidence and anyone who might be nearby. "Ouedraogo," Traoré called. "Contact the bomb disposal unit and get me a line to Colonel Sawadogo at the Defense Ministry. We need to lock down all military communications and find out how deep this conspiracy goes." The old cleaner, Bonkungu, stood nearby, breathing heavily from the exertion of their flight. His hands were shaking, and his face showed his age more clearly than before, but his eyes met Traoré's with a quiet satisfaction. "You listened," he said simply. "That is good. If you are enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can continue bringing you more and more content." Traoré approached the old man and placed both hands on his shoulders. "Father Bonkungu, you saved my life today. You saved the lives of my men. Your country owes you a debt." The old cleaner shook his head. "I did only what was right, sir. An old man's eyes may be weak, but they can still see danger. An old man's voice may be soft, but it can still speak truth. That is all I did. I saw, and I spoke." Chapter 7. The Aftermath. Within 20 minutes, the area around the logistics building was swarming with military personnel and emergency services. The bomb disposal unit arrived in their specialized vehicles, and Captain Diallo, the unit commander, immediately established a safety perimeter extending 200 meters from the building in all directions. Traoré watched from a command post that had been hastily set up in a nearby warehouse. He had refused to leave the scene until the situation was resolved, despite Ouedraogo's repeated attempts to convince him to return to a secure location. Maps of the building were spread out on tables, and radio chatter filled the air as various units coordinated their response. Colonel Sawadogo arrived, his face grim. He had brought several officers from military intelligence, and they immediately began interrogating the captured conspirator, a man who had identified himself as Sergeant Bambara. The sergeant had served in the Northern Territories, and a quick records check showed that he had been part of the force that Zongo commanded before Traoré took power. "What have we learned?" Traoré asked Sawadogo. The colonel's expression was troubled. "More than I wish, Captain. It appears this conspiracy involves at least a dozen people, possibly more. They plan to eliminate you and blame it on a jihadist attack. In the chaos that would follow, certain elements within the military planned to seize control, claiming they were restoring order." "And Zongo?" Traoré asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Captain Zongo is inside the building," Sawadogo confirmed. "He is on the 3rd floor with at least 2 others. We have tried to make contact, but he is not responding to radio calls. The bomb disposal team reports that the explosives are sophisticated, military-grade, with multiple redundancies. They estimate at least 40 kilograms of C4 distributed throughout the load-bearing columns." Traoré felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Zongo had been more than a fellow soldier. They had shared meals, shared dangers, shared dreams of a better Burkina Faso. What had changed? What had driven his former friend to betrayal? "Can they disarm the explosives?" Traoré asked. Captain Diallo, who had joined them at the command post, nodded cautiously. "Yes, but it will take time. The circuits are complex, and any mistake could trigger the entire system. We are looking at minimum 2 hours of work, possibly more. The biggest concern is that whoever is inside might have a remote detonator. If they realize we are disarming the charges, they could trigger them before we finish." "Then we need to get them out first," Traoré said. "Open a negotiation channel." Sawadogo looked skeptical. "Captain, these men tried to kill you. They have already killed Sergeant Bambara's partner when he tried to fight. They are cornered and desperate. Negotiation may not be possible." "Everything is possible until it is not," Traoré replied. "Get me that channel." A communications officer set up a radio link to the building's internal system. After several attempts, a voice finally crackled through the speakers. It was Zongo, and he sounded exhausted. "I know you're out there, Ibrahim. I know you escaped." Traoré took the microphone. "Zongo, what have you done? We fought together. We bled together. Why?" There was a long pause before Zongo responded. "Because you have gone too far, Ibrahim. Kicking out the French, nationalizing the mines, aligning with Russia and China, you are making enemies that will destroy us. I believed in the changes at first, but you have become reckless. You are driving Burkina Faso toward isolation and ruin. So you decided to kill me." Traoré's voice was calm, but the hurt was evident. "To blow up a building with me inside. That is your solution." "It was not supposed to be like this," Zongo said, and now Traoré could hear the anguish in his voice. "It was supposed to be quick, clean. You would die in what looked like a jihadist attack. No one would question it. The country would move on. But you brought that old cleaner into it. You changed the plan." Traoré glanced at Bonkungu, who stood nearby, listening to the exchange. The old man's face showed no triumph, only sadness at what he was hearing. "That old cleaner is a hero," Traoré said into the microphone. "He did what you used to do. He protected his country and his leader. He showed courage and honor. Can you say the same?" Silence from the radio. Then, "I thought I was showing courage, Ibrahim. I thought I was saving Burkina Faso from your mistakes. But standing here now, with explosives wired beneath my feet and knowing I failed, perhaps I was only showing fear. Fear of change. Fear of what we might become." Chapter 8. A Brother's Confession. The radio crackled again, and this time Zongo's voice carried a different quality, not the defeated tone of a man caught in a trap, but something more contemplative, almost confessional. "Do you remember Djibo, Ibrahim? When we held that position for 3 days with no supplies, no support, just 20 men against 100 jihadists." Traoré closed his eyes briefly, remembering. "I remember. You saved 4 wounded soldiers by carrying them one by one through enemy fire to the evacuation point. You should have received a medal for that." "I never wanted medals," Zongo replied. "I wanted our country to be safe. I wanted our soldiers to have what they needed. When you took power, I thought finally someone understood. But then you started making all these changes, cutting ties with traditional allies, making enemies of powerful nations. I became afraid, Ibrahim, afraid that your vision was bigger than our ability to achieve it." Colonel Sawadogo leaned in and whispered to Traoré, "Captain, we have positive identification of the other 2 individuals in the building. Lieutenant Cohn and Major Traoré, no relation to you. Both have connections to the former government. This goes higher than we thought." Traoré nodded, but kept his focus on the conversation with Zongo. "Fear is natural," he said into the microphone. "I have felt fear every day since taking this responsibility. Fear that I will fail our people. Fear that my decisions will lead to disaster. But we cannot let fear paralyze us. We cannot let it drive us to betray everything we believe in." "Easy words from the man who won," Zongo said bitterly. "What do you know of betrayal? You are the president. You have power. You can change policy with a word, redirect the nation's course with a signature. What power do I have?" "Only the power to try to stop what I saw as a catastrophe." Traoré felt a surge of frustration. "You had the power to talk to me, Zongo, to argue your case, to convince me if you thought I was wrong. Instead, you chose violence. You chose to plant explosives and lure me to my death. How is that the action of a man who believes in Burkina Faso?" The silence that followed was heavy. In the background, Traoré could hear Captain Diallo's bomb disposal team providing updates. They had successfully accessed the first cluster of explosives and were carefully beginning the disarmament process. But they were moving slowly, methodically, aware that a single mistake could bring the entire building down. Old Bonkungu touched Traoré's arm gently. "Sir, may I speak?" When Traoré nodded, the old man moved closer to the microphone. "Captain Zongo, my name is Bonkungu. I am the cleaner who warned the president. I am an old man who has lived through many changes in our country. I have seen presidents come and go. I have seen coups and counter-coups. And I will tell you something I have learned. Violence only brings more violence. Fear only brings more fear. But courage, Real courage comes from standing for what is right even when it is difficult. What do you know of courage, old man? Came the reply. You push a mop. You clean floors. You have never commanded men in battle. No, Bonkungu agreed. I have never commanded men, but I raised 7 children. I buried my wife. I worked for 40 years to feed my family and give them a future. And this morning, when I saw something wrong, I spoke up, even though I was afraid. That is the courage of ordinary people, Captain Zongo. It is the courage that builds nations more surely than any amount of military strategy. Traoré watched the old cleaner as he spoke, seeing in his weathered face the dignity of a life lived with integrity. It was men like Bonkungu, not generals or presidents, who were the true backbone of Burkina Faso. They worked, they endured, they raised families, and when the moment demanded it, they found the courage to do what was right. The radio crackled again. Perhaps you are right, old man, Zongo said, and now his voice was thick with emotion. Perhaps I lost my way. Ibrahim, I am sorry. Not for trying to stop you. I believe that was necessary, but I am sorry for the method. I should have been brave enough to confront you directly, to argue my position, to accept that I might be wrong. Instead, I took the coward's path. It is not too late, Traoré said urgently. The bomb disposal team is working now. Help them. Tell us the configuration of the explosives. Give them the codes for the detonators. Come out, face justice, but do it with honor. Honor, Zongo repeated slowly. Yes, perhaps there is still a way to salvage some honor from this disaster. The detonator system has 3 primary circuits, red, blue, and green. Red controls the ground floor charges, blue the second floor, green the third. There is also a master failsafe that can trigger everything at once. The code to disable the master failsafe is 472968. Ibrahim and I... The transmission cut off abruptly. For a heart-stopping moment, Traoré thought the explosives had detonated, but then he saw Captain Diallo listening intently to his headset, nodding and making notes. The bomb disposal team had received the information and was acting on it. Chapter 9. Race Against Time. The next hour was one of the most tense in Traoré's life. Captain Diallo's bomb disposal experts worked with painstaking care, using Zongo's information to systematically disable the explosive circuits. Each successful disarmament was reported, and each report brought Traoré a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. Relief that they were making progress, anxiety that they were not finished yet. Colonel Sawadogo coordinated with other military units across Ouagadougou, quietly identifying and detaining suspects linked to the conspiracy. The investigation was revealing a network of disaffected officers, many of whom had connections to the previous administration or to foreign interests that opposed Traoré's policies. It was exactly the kind of internal threat that Sawadogo had warned about earlier that morning. The captured Sergeant Bambra was providing information, though reluctantly. He confirmed that the plot had been in motion for weeks, with Zongo serving as the operational leader, but taking orders from someone higher up in the military hierarchy. When pressed for a name, Bambra claimed he did not know. The conspiracy had been compartmentalized, with each cell knowing only its specific role. Traoré stood near the command post, watching the logistics building through binoculars. He could see the bomb disposal technicians moving carefully through the structure, their bulky protective suits making them look like figures from another world. The Harmattan wind had picked up again, blowing red dust across the scene and giving everything an otherworldly quality. Old Bonkungu sat on a crate nearby, drinking water that someone had brought him. The exertion and stress of the morning had taken their toll on the elderly cleaner, but he had refused to leave until the situation was resolved. I must see this through, he had told Traoré. I began this story. I should see how it ends. A military intelligence officer approached with a tablet, showing Traoré intercepted communications that had been flagged in the last hour. Sir, we have detected unusual activity on several military channels. It appears that news of the failed operation has leaked. There are coded messages being exchanged between certain units. Can you decode them? Traoré asked. Not yet, but the pattern suggests coordination. We believe other elements of the conspiracy may be preparing to act, either to complete the mission or to destroy evidence and flee the country. Traoré made a decision. Lock down all military facilities. No one enters or leaves without my personal authorization. And get me General Kabore on a secure line. I need to know if we can trust him." The call to General Traoré was brief but reassuring. The old general expressed shock at the conspiracy and immediately offered his full support. "Captain Traoré," Traoré said, his voice firm, "I have served this country for 34 years. I did not always agree with your methods, but I have always respected your commitment to our nation. If there are traitors in our ranks, I will help you root them out." As the afternoon wore on, Captain Diallo finally reported the breakthrough they had been waiting for. "We have disabled all primary circuits. The building is no longer at immediate risk of catastrophic collapse. We are now working on removing the actual explosives, but the immediate danger has passed." A collective sigh of relief went through the command post. But Traoré's focus remained on the building. What about the people inside? What about Zongo and the others? "We have established radio contact," Diallo replied. "Captain Zongo is cooperating fully. He and the other two are preparing to exit through the main entrance. We will take them into custody." Minutes later, the door of the logistics building opened. 3 figures emerged, hands raised, moving slowly and deliberately. Our security team immediately moved forward, weapons trained on the men. They were quickly surrounded, searched, and placed in restraints. Traoré watched as Zongo was led away. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and Traoré saw in his former friend's face a mixture of shame, relief, and resignation. Zongo had made his choice, and now he would face the consequences. But he had also, in the end, chosen to help prevent further bloodshed. That counted for something, even if it could not erase the betrayal. Bonkungu stood beside Traoré, watching the scene unfold. "Sir," the old cleaner said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course, father." "What will happen to Captain Zongo? He tried to kill you, but in the end, he helped save many lives. What does justice look like in such a case?" Traoré considered the question carefully. "Justice is never simple, father. Zongo will face trial for his crimes, but I will also ensure that his cooperation today is noted. He made terrible choices, but he did not compound them by allowing innocent people to die when he had the power to prevent it. That must mean something." "You are wise to think this way," Bonkungu said. "The purpose of justice is not just punishment, but also teaching. If Zongo's story can teach others about the consequences of betrayal and the possibility of redemption, then perhaps some good can come from this terrible day." Chapter 10. National Implications. In the days following the failed assassination attempt, Burkina Faso found itself at a crossroads. News of the conspiracy spread quickly through Ouagadougou and beyond, carried by radio broadcasts, social media, and the rapid word-of-mouth communication that characterized African information networks. The revelation that elements within the military had attempted to kill the president sent shockwaves through the nation. Traoré addressed the country on the evening after the incident, speaking from the presidential palace. He stood behind a simple podium, wearing his military uniform rather than formal civilian attire. The choice was deliberate. He wanted to remind people of where he came from and what he represented. "Citizens of Burkina Faso," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Yesterday, certain individuals attempted to end my life and derail the progress we have been making together. They failed, not because of military might or political maneuvering, but because an ordinary citizen, a cleaner named Bonkungu, had the courage to speak up when he saw something wrong. His bravery represents the best of what it means to be Burkinabe: vigilance, courage, and commitment to doing what is right, even at personal risk." The camera panned briefly to show Bonkungu sitting in the front row of the assembled audience, looking uncomfortable with the attention but dignified in a new suit that Traoré Siha's staff had provided. The old man nodded respectfully when his name was mentioned. Traoré continued, "This incident has revealed cracks in our foundation, people within our own military who lost faith in our vision for Burkina Faso. I could respond with anger and purges. I could use this as an excuse to consolidate power and eliminate all opposition. But that is not the path we have chosen. Instead, we will use this moment to strengthen our national dialogue. We will listen to those who disagree with our policies, engage with their concerns, and work together to find solutions. Dissent is not treason. Disagreement is not betrayal. Only violence and deception are beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior." The speech was broadcast across the country and quickly picked up by international media. Reactions were mixed. Supporters praised Traoré's measured response and his commitment to national unity. Critics suggested he was showing weakness at a moment that demanded strength. Some international observers expressed concern about the stability of Burkina Faso's government, while others noted that the quick resolution of the crisis demonstrated the resilience of the current administration. In the following days, Traoré met with various stakeholders, military commanders, political leaders, civil society representatives, and traditional chiefs. Many of these meetings were tense, as people on all sides had strong opinions about what should happen next. Some military officers demanded harsh punishment for all conspirators. Some political leaders called for a more open democratic process. Traditional chiefs counseled patience and reconciliation. One particularly significant meeting was with the Moro Naba, the king of the Mossi people. The elderly monarch received Traoré in the traditional palace in Ouagadougou, a ceremony that was rich with cultural symbolism. The Moro Naba, dressed in elaborate traditional robes, listened carefully as Traoré explained the situation and his intended response. "Young man," the Moro Naba said when Traoré finished speaking, "you remind me of warriors from the old days, those who understood that true strength comes not from crushing your enemies, but from building a foundation so strong that enemies become unnecessary. The cleaner who saved your life understood something that many powerful men forget. We are all part of the same community. When one person suffers, we all suffer. When one person shows courage, we all benefit." The Moro Naba's endorsement carried significant weight among the Mossi people, who made up the largest ethnic group in Burkina Faso. His public support for Traoré's approach helped to calm tensions and reinforce the message of national unity. Meanwhile, the investigation into the conspiracy continued. Colonel Ouagadougou's team uncovered evidence of foreign involvement, encrypted communications with contacts in neighboring countries, and financial transactions that suggested external funding. The picture that emerged was troubling. The conspiracy had not been a purely domestic affair, but part of a broader effort by external actors to destabilize Burkina Faso. "They knew that killing you would create chaos," Ouagadougou explained to Traoré during a private briefing, "and in that chaos, they hoped to install someone more amenable to their interests. The fact that Burkinabés saved you, both Father Bonkungu and ultimately Captain Zongo, disrupted their plans completely." Traoré looked at the evidence spread across the table: financial records, communications intercepts, intelligence reports. It painted a picture of a nation under siege, not just from jihadist insurgents in the north, but from more sophisticated enemies operating through proxies and manipulation. "What do we do about the foreign actors?" he asked. Ouagadougou considered the question carefully. "Officially, very little. We have no concrete proof that would stand up in international forums. But unofficially, we can make it clear that we know what they attempted. We can strengthen our counterintelligence capabilities, and we can use this incident to justify closer cooperation with our allies in Mali, Niger, and elsewhere who face similar threats." "The alliance of Sahel states," Traoré said thoughtfully, "this strengthens the case for why we need it. If our enemies can operate across borders, so must our defenses." Chapter 11. Recognition and Reflection. 3 weeks after the failed assassination, a special ceremony was held at the Ouagadougou city center. Thousands of people gathered to witness Traoré present Bonkungu with the National Order of Merit, Burkina Faso's highest civilian honor. The medal, made of gold and enameled with the national colors, was pinned to the old cleaner's chest as the crowd cheered. "Father Bonkungu represents everything good about our nation," Traoré said during the ceremony. He did not have to speak up. He could have walked away, kept his head down, protected only himself. But he chose to risk his own safety to protect someone else, not because of political loyalty, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. That is the spirit we need to build a better Burkina Faso. Bonkungu, speaking into a microphone for the first time in his life, was brief and humble. "I am just an old man who cleans buildings," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I have lived long enough to know that we are all responsible for each other. When I saw danger, I had to speak. Not because I am brave, I am not brave, I was frightened. But sometimes fear of doing nothing is greater than fear of taking action." The crowd erupted in applause. Videos of the ceremony spread rapidly on social media, with the hashtag Bonkungu Courage trending across West Africa. The old cleaner became an unexpected symbol of civic virtue. proof that ordinary citizens could make a difference in their nation's destiny. But the ceremony was not just about celebrating a hero, it was also about beginning a process of national healing. Several other individuals were recognized that day, members of the bomb disposal team who had risked their lives to disarm the explosives, security personnel who had responded quickly to the crisis, and intelligence officers who had helped unravel the conspiracy. In a move that surprised many, Traoré also arranged for Zongo's family to receive financial support. "We must separate the person from the deed," he explained to his advisors who questioned the decision. "Zongo's wife and children did not commit any crime. They should not suffer poverty because of his mistakes. By helping them, we show that justice can be merciful without being weak." The trials of the conspirators were conducted with careful attention to due process. Zongo and the others faced courts-martial that were open to the public and the press. Evidence was presented methodically, witnesses testified, and the accused were given opportunities to defend themselves. Zongo's testimony was particularly powerful. He acknowledged his role in the conspiracy, explained his motivations, and expressed genuine remorse. "I believed I was saving Burkina Faso," he said from the witness stand, "but I was only serving my own fear and doubt. Captain Traoré has shown more courage in how he has handled this crisis than I showed in all my years as a soldier. If I could undo what I did, I would. Since I cannot, I can only accept my punishment and hope that my example serves as a warning to others who might consider taking similar paths." The military court found Zongo guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy, and treason. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years if he demonstrated genuine rehabilitation. The other conspirators received similar sentences, varying based on their level of involvement and cooperation with investigators. But the most significant conspirator, the one identified as Icarus in intercepted communications, the person who had allegedly orchestrated the entire operation, remained at large. Despite extensive investigations, his or her identity remained a mystery. Some suspected it was a high-ranking officer who had fled the country. Others believed it might be a foreign intelligence operative. Traoré established a special task force to continue the investigation, but as weeks turned into months, the trail grew cold. One evening, Traoré invited Bonkungu to a private dinner at the presidential residence. The old cleaner arrived wearing the same suit he had worn to the ceremony, clearly uncomfortable with the formal setting. But Traoré put him at ease, serving simple food, tow and okra sauce, traditional Burkinabe dishes, and speaking as one person to another rather than as president to citizen. "Father Bonkungu," Traoré said as they ate, "I have been thinking about what you said during the crisis, that you raised 7 children and buried your wife, and that this was its own kind of courage. Tell me about your life. Who were you before you became a hero?" Bonkungu smiled at the gentle mockery in Traoré's voice. "I am no hero, sir. Just a man who lived. I was born in a small village near Koudougou. My father was a farmer, and I learned to work the land as a boy. But when I was 18, there was a drought and the crops failed. I came to Ouagadougou looking for work. I found a job as a cleaner at the logistics building. That was 50 years ago." 50 years? Traoré was surprised. "You have worked at that building for 50 years?" "Yes, sir. I cleaned it when it was new. I cleaned it through 3 different governments. I cleaned it even after they said it would be demolished. It was my job, and I took pride in doing it well." He paused, looking down at his weathered hands. "My wife, Awa, she was patient with me. 7 children on a cleaner's salary. It was not easy, but we managed. We were happy." "What would Awa think about all this?" Traoré asked gently. "About you receiving the National Order of Merit, meeting with the president." Bonkungu's eyes grew misty. "She would laugh, I think. She always said I was too serious, too worried about doing everything right. She would say, 'See, old man, all those years of paying attention, of noticing small things, of doing your work with care, it mattered.' She would be proud, but she would not let it go to my head." He smiled at the memory. Chapter 12. A New Beginning. 6 months after the assassination attempt, Burkina Faso had settled into a new normal. The conspiracy had been largely dismantled, though vigilance remained high. The incident had paradoxically strengthened Traoré's position. The way he had handled the crisis, prioritizing national unity over revenge, had won him respect even from some who had previously opposed him. The logistics building had been demolished as originally planned, but a memorial had been erected on the site. It featured a bronze statue of a cleaner holding a mop with a simple inscription: "Courage comes in many forms. Remember Bonkunguta, who saw danger and spoke truth." It became a popular gathering place, especially for ordinary workers who saw in Bonkungu's story a validation of their own lives and contributions. Bonkungu himself had retired from cleaning, living on a generous pension that Traoré had arranged through a public subscription fund. Citizens from across Burkina Faso and beyond had contributed, wanting to honor the old man who had saved their president. But Bonkungu remained humble, using much of the money to establish a scholarship fund for children from working-class families. "Education is the real work that needs doing," he told reporters. "I cleaned buildings for 50 years. Maybe these scholarships will help young people build things instead of cleaning up after them." Traoré had implemented several reforms in the wake of the crisis. Military personnel now underwent enhanced psychological evaluations to identify potential security risks. New channels were established for soldiers to voice concerns and grievances without fear of retaliation. And most significantly, Traoré began holding regular public forums where citizens could question him directly about government policies. At one such forum, a young university student asked the question many were thinking: "Mr. President, do you ever worry that it might happen again? That someone else might try to kill you?" Traoré considered the question carefully before answering. "Yes, I worry. I would be foolish not to. But I also know that fear cannot dictate my decisions. Every day I wake up and make a choice. Will I lead based on fear of what might happen, or based on hope for what could be? The day I choose fear is the day I should step down, because that is the day I stop being effective." He paused, then added, "But I also learned something important from this experience. I learned that I cannot do this alone. Father Bonkungu saved my life not because he was trained to do so, not because it was his job, but because he was paying attention and he cared enough to act. That taught me that our nation's security does not rest only on soldiers and intelligence services. It rests on all of us, on every citizen who chooses to notice what is wrong and has the courage to speak up." The reforms extended beyond security matters. True to his promise, Traoré engaged more actively with critics of his policies. Some of the concerns raised by Zongo and others were, he reluctantly admitted, valid. Burkina Faso's pivot away from traditional Western allies had created economic challenges that needed to be addressed. The nationalization of gold mines had brought initial benefits, but also complications that required careful management. "Leadership is about learning," Traoré told his advisors during one strategy session. "Zongo was wrong to try to kill me, but he was not entirely wrong about everything. We need to find balance, maintaining our sovereignty and independence while not isolating ourselves unnecessarily. We need to be smart about which fights to pick and which relationships to preserve." This more nuanced approach gradually bore fruit. While maintaining the core principles that had driven his rise to power: African sovereignty, development of local resources, resistance to exploitation, Traoré proved willing to negotiate and compromise on implementation details. Some criticized this as weakness, but others recognized it as mature leadership. The anniversary of the assassination attempt was marked with a national day of reflection. Traoré visited the memorial at the old logistics building site, laying flowers at the base of Bonkungu's statue. The old cleaner stood beside him, no longer intimidated by the cameras and crowds. A journalist called out a question: "Father Bonkungu, if you could go back to that morning, knowing what you know now, would you still warn the president?" Bonkungu smiled at the question. "Young man, every choice we make creates ripples we cannot see. I did not warn President Traoré because I knew it would lead to all this. I warned him because it seemed like the right thing to do in that moment. That is all any of us can do: make the best choice we can with what we know, and trust that doing right leads to good outcomes." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Traoré and Bonkungu walked together through the streets of Ouagadougou, talking like the friends they had become. The president's security detail maintained a discreet distance, allowing the two men a measure of privacy. "Sir," Bonkungu said, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, father." "Do you ever regret taking power? Do you ever wish you could just be a soldier again without all this responsibility?" Traoré looked up at the sky, where the harmattan dust created a hazy orange glow as the sun began to set. "Every single day," he admitted, "but regret is a luxury I cannot afford. The moment I took this path, I accepted the burden. Now I must carry it until either my task is complete or someone else can carry it better." "That is the answer of a true leader," Bonkungu said approvingly. "Not someone who wants power, but someone who accepts the responsibility because no one else will." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Just two men, one old and one young, one a cleaner and one a president, united by a shared moment that had changed both their lives. Around them, Ouagadougou continued its daily rhythm. Children playing in the streets, merchants closing their shops, the smell of evening meals cooking, the sound of music drifting from open windows. It was an ordinary evening in an extraordinary country, a land of upright people trying to build a better future. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Bonkungu had demonstrated and that Traoré had embraced. Real change begins not with grand gestures or revolutionary proclamations, but with ordinary people having the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult. The story of the cleaner who saved a president became legend in Burkina Faso, told and retold in different forms. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was not about one dramatic day, but about what came after. A nation learning to trust its citizens, a president learning to listen, and an old man showing that wisdom and courage have nothing to do with wealth or status and everything to do with character. As darkness fell over Ouagadougou, lights began to twinkle in homes and businesses across the city. Each light represented a life, a family, a story, and all of them, in some small way, had been touched by the events of that morning when an ordinary cleaner had seen danger and chosen to speak. The end.